Welcome back to the Anchored Podcast, the official podcast of the Classic Learning Test. My name is Soren Schwab, VP of Partnerships here at CLT, and today we're joined by Andrew Smalley. Dr. Smalley joined the Veritas Classical School in St. Augustine with an extensive background in K-12 classical Christian education. In addition to direct classroom work, Andrew has 15 years of administrative experience, including serving as Dean of Students at a school in Pennsylvania and Director of Fine Arts in Texas. He is originally from England and completed his postgraduate certificate in education at Birmingham City University and his Master's of Arts degree at Villanova. He completed his doctorate in educational leadership, having also completed his educational specialist degree in the same discipline. Andrew is passionate about leadership development for students, faculty, and administration in the Christian school environment and is a national speaker in this area. In recent years, he has been invited to speak at the national conferences for the ACCS, CISA, and SCL, as well as the Deeper Learning Conference. He has served on the advisory council for the Institute of Classical Education at Flagler College, and he is also a board member of CLT's very own academic advisor board, and we're so delighted to have him. Andrew and his wife, Robin, have been married since 2002 and have 3 children who attend Veritas. Not so little known fact, if you know Andrew, he's also an avid runner, a competitive triathlete, and I actually didn't know that, an avid sailor in his spare time. So we can't wait to have you in Annapolis here in a few weeks, Andrew. Welcome.
Good to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, it's always good to talk to a fellow European, and I'm sure we're not gonna talk too much about Leicester. They had their time a few years ago and have been forgotten. I'm kidding.
Partially true, yes.
Partially true. No lies detected. But we always start the Anchored podcast by talking about our guest's own educational background, and really interested, Andrew, to hear kind of about your K-12 experience. Probably wasn't called K-12 experience, but
Right.
tell us a little bit about your education.
Yeah. So really grew up in central England. Was the third child. I had 2 older sisters, which is an important part of my educational journey because they were superstar academics, just straight A's, and then comes through this, the boy at the end of the road who was not a straight A student by any stretch of the imagination. And so I would say my educational experience was kind of tainted a little bit by that. I was at 16, having finished my GCSE exams, which is very much a formula to, get this exam done and study for it and then move on. And I was the happiest child to leave school at 16. And so that became obviously a big part of my story, as you just heard. I did some more education.
Yeah, just
the Lord,
a tad.
pulled me back in. And I think even today, I'm driving to school and, God's just smiling at me going, look, Andrew, you're still at school. You wanted to go so badly, and yet there you are. You're still going to school.
He has a
and
sense
you're
of
a little
humor.
bit older now. So I see it as God's sense of humor that really he kind of kept pulling me back in. And I think some of that was just maturity of, understanding, and certainly the gospel being true in my life made me a little bit more curious and wanting to think deeper on many things. So yeah.
Did you were you raised in a Christian home in England?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I was. I would say, Christianity in the UK and maybe, stereotypically across Europe is a lot less evangelical, I would say. And so it was much more of a church experience of just tradition. That's what we do on a Sunday. We go and we, then get back to the rest of our lives. And really, I didn't see the gospel really being played out in the lives of really the people around me in the way that I've seen it in more recent years. And so, but yeah.
Yeah, that seems to, I grew up as a Protestant in Germany, and it's definitely much more high church. I mean, the churches are empty, but much more high church and organ and all that. And so I remember the first time going to a church, American evangelical church, and seeing a a drummer behind a plexiglass, and that was a quite formative kind of
Yeah,
moment for me. Like, wow, that is
that's a
different.
different church experience right there. Yeah,
Very much so. Very
absolutely.
much so. So talk to us. You go to Birmingham City University. Was that kind of your?
Yeah, so I mean, just to kind of finish out that section in terms of my education, so I went and I did really a vocational course really between 16 and 18 within
Mhm,
performing arts because I was doing a lot of that and just saw that as the fun avenue to just kind of keep going with a little study.
mhm,
And really it was after that where I first came to the States, and this is where my sister's part of this plays in because they had traveled around Europe at the age of 18, finishing kind of the high school road. And I said, well, I'm just going to do something bigger and better. I'm just going to one up them and go to America. So I worked at a summer camp in the Poconos. And at that time, really thousands of miles from home was really my realization that I didn't want to run my own life. I didn't really desire to pretend that I had it all together because I didn't, and that was a fairly radical shift and realization that I really needed to commit to following Jesus, and knew that in that situation, as I had 10 8-year-old campers coming from inner city Philadelphia, a place that I couldn't even imagine. I'm coming from a small village, in England, that I could only be helpful for them if I truly was looking at it through the lens of Christianity and the
mhm.
gospel. And so, my life was pretty radically changed, transformed in that time frame. And so, the camp became a very special place for me. And I ended up kind of coming back for a few summers as I realized, as I got into college, and I was every spring I'd be like, okay, what am I going to do this summer? And I was like, the best ministry opportunity I possibly have is
Yeah.
going back to that camp. And so I would come back again. So part of my, reason to even be in the States comes from that. And, really the story goes that it was really, I came to work full time, 50% for the girl and 50% for the Christian education. So, I had met my now wife, and we dated across the ocean for 2 years, which I
Wow.
do not recommend for anybody, even in a world of technology now. But
Mhm,
we finally found ourselves on the same soil in Philadelphia, and I ended up working at her alma mater in Philadelphia, and was just so happy to get to Christian education is what I would
mhm,
say. I think it's still really a little known fact. You're gonna be looking at old works and go, "Oh, all these people are from, the UK," but really there is no Christian education to speak of at that K-12 level.
mhm.
There's little small pockets of it, and I even today get an opportunity to try and encourage some of that, even classical education that's trying to bubble up,
Uh-huh.
which I'm super excited about. But really, at that time, there was really nothing, and I just wanted, and really just my heart's desire was to be able to be myself in front of my students. And I
Mhm,
felt without basically sharing, this is who I am, and this is why I am the way that I am, without being able to do that. And I had a very great mentor at the university in Birmingham who basically said, you just do the best you can in public education. And I walked out of that meeting and just said, I I believe that answer, but I want something better for myself, professionally and personally. And so Christian education was exactly what I had desired and what I was able to do as a young teacher.
wow, and so what was kind of that journey into, I'm assuming first the classroom before you kind of went
Yeah.
to into administration?
Yeah, so I was teaching some theater, I was teaching some Bible, I was teaching some English, which I thought was kind of fun as I arrived, from England. But quickly
Same.
realized that the things that I said um that came across as odd were just distracting. And so I immediately was changing some of my vocabulary to help the
Yeah.
students stay focused.
You start
Um,
calling it soccer instead of football.
Things
Is
like
that
that.
yeah.
Exactly, exactly. Those kinds of things. So I was, but I really one of the things that really pushed me into school leadership was specifically within theater, I was running productions, and so I was running a staff,
Mhm.
right? As a 23-year-old, I was running a staff that was also, and then putting all these kids into roles and putting them on stage. And really, at some point in this journey, I really walked into the head of school at the time and just said, I see, athletics is really doing well at our school, but I really see that fine arts is really doing really well. And I said, I really feel like there needs to be some sense of, a director figure for all of these teachers that's not just in production season, but it runs a full year. And the head of school at the time, much to my amazement, was like, yep, sounds great. And so I worked myself at that point, I was dean of students, but I worked myself out of that job in that meeting. And suddenly I was, directing a full arts department, really 6-12, but essentially K-12. And so that was a definite transition point for me.
Wow, and it's kind of a slow, yeah, stepping stone more into administration. Um, you were at that point in Christian education.
Yes.
When did you first hear about whether it's kind of Christian liberal arts education or maybe even the term classical Christian
Yeah.
education?
Yeah, so this came just a couple years later as I'm realizing I'm feeling a shift that I needed to be, kind of working towards something a little bit with a greater management, I guess is what I
Mhm.
would say. So I was really kind of just aware that I felt like I wasn't being challenged in the role, and I really felt like I wanted even a bigger kind of staff that I could lead. And so it literally was a Google search for Christian fine arts directors that was really meant to help build my own job description, not meant to find a new job.
Oh wow.
Um, but in my Google search, up pops a school in Austin, and really at that point, I'm learning about classical education,
Hmm.
Christian obviously, but classical education, and um, just became it was kind of a like I just was looking at my job description, I'm looking at the other job description, and I'm starting to go, no, this is what I want. And my wife Robin basically said, when I read the job description, it literally had your name written all over it. Even though she's
Wow.
born and raised in Philadelphia, we had no intention of leaving. We had our kids were actually um third generation in that Christian school, and just felt like that's where we were going to be. But God had other plans because we
Hmm.
visited the school. Both of us just very quickly enamored with the product of a classical Christian education. That was what was really very apparent in just a 3-day interview process. That when we were speaking to the 9th through 12th grade students, we knew, and it wasn't rose tinted classes because we had just come from a school, right? It was, okay, these students are just
Hmm.
communicating on a different level. So it really was we have to come and figure out how this product is produced.
Hmm. And I think we can share what school it was. And a lot of our it was the Regents, right? It was
Yep.
Regents
Yep.
School of Austin.
Yep.
Um, which of course was that point already a fairly established
Very
classical
established. Yeah.
Christian school and
Yep.
large too. I mean, I think it's still the largest. So it's not like it was, well, they can do this because it's, they have like 50 students or something. I mean, it's a
Right.
pretty
No, it
sizable
was,
school.
yeah. It was, yeah. So I was coming in and I was managing, rather than kind of working with 4 or 5 teachers, I was really managing essentially with all of the part-time people, nearly 30 staff. So it was just a very different feel. And really I was watching and learning, how is this classical education producing the quality of student that's going out into the world. That's what really both my wife and I realized, that's what that time frame was needed for. And we just watched and learned a whole lot.
Wow. Well, I'm curious, and we have a mutual friend and now colleague of mine, Dr. Tim Weens, who I think was during the time you were in Philadelphia was he the headmaster
Yep.
while
Yep.
you were there?
Yes.
And think the world of Tim. I mean, he is such a great leader, and he's kind of been in the larger Christian non-classical schools, but as he would say, he's a liberal arts guy, right?
Yes.
And so I'm curious to pick your brain because you've kind of been in kind of the larger Christian schools, non-classical, large Christian school, classical. Now you lead your own classical Christian that is it's growing significantly. We'll talk about that, but it's on the smaller side. I'm kind of curious. What did you take away from your time at kind of the larger Christian schools, and maybe some of the similarities that you see? Because I think sometimes we talk about, well, we're classical Christian schools, we're different, we're doing X, Y, and Z, but there's so many similarities too, especially if you contrast it with what the public schools are doing. What are some of those similarities that you were seeing that impacted you?
Yeah, I mean, to use a word that maybe is overused, but discipleship is happening,
Mhm.
right? Like, I mean, at any Christian school, you want to believe that discipleship is a primary goal, right? That these kids, it's not it can be tough to disciple on a Wednesday night and a Sunday morning, right? But to disciple when you're seeing these kids 5 days a week, beginning of
Mhm.
the day, end of the day, you are getting an opportunity to do deep discipleship on a second grade level, a 10th grade level, wherever they are, right? So yes, I have many friends that work in Christian schools, and my wife is a product of Christian education,
Mhm.
and I have so much good to say because of that, right? There's certain things that she'll say something to me. I'm like, yep, I guess you would know that,
Yeah.
and I don't have that
Yep.
background. And I will share that even with students. Like, guys, I did not have this privileged position to sit under mentor leaders in classrooms every day who just love and care for me, whether I got a D or an A, or whether I said something I shouldn't say or said something super encouraging that, changed the direction of the class. So, even just that sense of leadership, consistent leaders in these schools is so important, right? From the top, but also down. Like you have some people who just give 40 years of classroom,
Mhm.
to an eighth grade class, like they've been teaching. You just kind of go, the depth of impact is so deep. You see those graduates coming back, walking into the school. I'm looking for so and so, and you're like, yes, of course you are, right?
Yeah.
Everybody comes looking for them. So I have so just to know the impact that Christian education has had on my family, and know that there's within Christian environment, we're obviously calling students, and this again is an overused word in my mind, but we're calling them to excellence, right? So
Mhm.
we're not just saying, okay, that's good enough, great, just hand it in. We should, in any type of Christian education, be saying, Soren, I think you could do better work. Like I'm giving this back to you because I would like you to do it over, and that you would learn, yeah, they're absolutely right. Like and so it's unto the Lord, right? That everything that we're doing, building that muscle within them to say, I need to give my best work every time, even if I don't want to do it, right? And building that, um, really building the muscle of being a resilient person,
Mhm.
through hardship, is something that we don't necessarily even in Christian school want to talk about, right? Well, no, all
Yeah.
our teachers are great and they're wonderful. No, sometimes that teacher's personality does not mesh with your child's personality. What are you going to do about it? Are
Yeah.
you going to say, "Oh, let's rescue my child out of that class and have them transfer to another class"? No, actually, you're going to sit with that and you're going to try and work through that for the sake of your child, because we all know sometimes down the road they get a boss they don't like, and are you quitting the job or probably staying in the job, right? So building that resiliency to the challenges of life, is so important, that we're preparing them for a life of service to mankind.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's beautifully said, and I think as an employer as well, um, getting to work with some students that have received this kind of education, it is so blatantly obvious
Yeah.
And for lack of a better term, I usually say they're just different. They're different, you know? And I think the one thing that is such an undervalued trait in whether it's a student or later on employee is that curiosity.
Hmm.
They want to know. They seek truth, right? It's been instilled in them. They want to know, and they're just not content with, well, I don't know,
Hmm.
you know? And that's just something that is really hard to train. Hey, be more curious.
Right.
You know,
Right.
from one day to the other. That's something over years, right?
Yes.
That there is
No.
truth out there, that's knowable, that we should seek it and pursue it, but that's exactly what Christian schools do.
Right. And I think I became enamored with the final project and the recognition that we're building all the way up to the senior thesis within classical Christian
Mhm.
education, and the incredible burden, but yet something that a student knows I have to go there. I'm going to
Yeah,
get to the senior thesis, so I've got to be ready. And then to watch these students do something so hard, right? Something that is just gut wrenching, that is a long, year long project. Not many students have to do anything that's more than a week long, right? In
right.
majority of schools. So a year long project. And then to watch them with poise deliver a senior thesis. And then, as the applause kind of rises, just to watch almost their shoulders go
Right,
down and the pride of, I just did something really hard, and I am so thankful that I got to do it, right? And, it just feels like it really accelerates them into the workplace, that they can say, "Look, I don't necessarily know about something that you're asking me to do, but I can figure it out. I've done a
right.
hard thing. I can do another hard thing."
Yeah, yeah, but, I mean, and obviously you are an athlete as I read in the bio. We rationally, right, we know, and we can kind of think about that feeling after finishing, well, I can't, a triathlon. I did a
Right?
half marathon the other week. That was a good feeling afterwards, right? But still, that daily, that the grind, right? Doing that, even though we know, right? Like you said, that muscle, it's hard. It takes so much discipline and so much encouragement. But for these students to do it and then to look back,
Yep.
the kind of satisfaction that they have, it's a beautiful thing. But it's hard. It is really, really, really hard.
But we're guiding. I mean, if you've got the right people in place, then
Yeah.
you're guiding them through those hard moments. And again, they've just done something that it is such a mountaintop experience for these
Yeah.
students.
Yeah.
That quite literally one of my favorite stories from my school this past year was when we pulled a salutatorian and valedictorian and said, "Okay, you're salutatorian, you're valedictorian." And then we said, one other thing, like, we need you to speak at graduation. And it was just comical because they're like, "Oh, I, oh, we know how to do that. Like,
Yeah.
we just did a senior thesis." Like, "Oh, we know that you did a senior
Right.
thesis. Like, we've walked that road with you." And the fact that they just were like, "Well, what do you want us to talk about?" That's great. It's easy, right? Was just absolutely, like, mind-blowing, 'cause if you'd seen this student the year before and just said, "Hey, I'm gonna need you to do this," I think they would have crumbled and said, I'm gonna need a lot of information. I'm not gonna maybe do that." So it does create these moments. And I think in our own lives, we can see that sometimes, maybe all the time, when we're pushed to do something that's kind of beyond what we think
Mhm.
is possible, obviously, number one, it gives us an opportunity to actually obviously lean on the Lord and say, "Okay, I can't do this in my own strength," which is very,
Mhm.
very important, that we need to, give them those opportunities. But secondly, it's really just, it's giving them a sense of pride of accomplishment, that they can take on something that in the future that is hard, whether that's a university education or even, parenthood, right? Or
Yeah.
whatever it is that's coming down the road for that particular student, they have been given a level of confidence by doing something that feels beyond what they can do themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've had the privilege of visiting your school in beautiful St. Augustine. We live in Annapolis. It's I mean there are a lot of similarities. They're both called I mean they're both historical, and a lot of people refer to them as charming. And I've tried to come up with a better word, but I think it actually
That's a good
it's the
word.
nail on the head. It is
Yeah.
just a
Yeah.
beautiful place. Andrew, tell us a little bit about your school when you joined it, and you're in Florida. We hear a lot about the growth of classical education in Florida. I think Veritas is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, so I came to be head of school here in 2021. School at that time of 121 students, so really a startup school. I think it's right for me to
Yeah.
recognize, even though my children may not hear this, it was going from a very large classical school to a startup. But God had called me very definitively to be a head of school, and oddly enough, we just mentioned CISA earlier in this call in regarding, large schools, and I have a lot of respect for the
Mhm.
organization CISA. Um, it was actually at a CISA conference that God called me to be a head of school, and I was just 14 months into my time in Austin. And
Yeah.
so again, I really sat and learned and listened and just watched and waited. And I'd say patiently waited, which sounds, I'm not being facetious when I say that. I really wasn't ready to take on the headship. I was like, Lord, if you want me to do this, I will do it, but I don't feel compelled to just go find the job until you really show
Yeah.
it to me. And so this particular job popped up, and my wife says, "Well, it sounds like we're going to Florida." I said,
What?
"Well, what do you mean?" She's like, "Well, we have to go to Florida and figure out if this is what the Lord is calling us to next." And I was like, "Okay, I'm game for that." So we came and we learned and we watched. And specifically where this particular school is, and I guess this may be a word to somebody who's listening, but I really felt this board had really formed to finish the trivium, right? So the grammar,
Mm,
logic, rhetoric, they had formed to say, we want to see our children complete a three-part thing, not do two parts and then go somewhere else.
yeah.
And I said, okay, that's really interesting because I went to Austin to learn how that third part really came
Works.
about. And I said, I think I can come and help. And so really we were moving on that school year that I came in 2021. There was one ninth grader. So I was coming just again, comparisons, like 340 rhetoric students in
Yeah.
one school to
What?
one or at that time, by the time I got there, four students in our rhetoric school. And really what we've been doing over the last 5 years is really helping get students to the goal of graduation and
Yeah.
and then out into the world. And so right now Veritas has 4 alumni. That'll be 7 alumni by May of 2026. And then that following year, we'll have a class of 12, and then followed that by 17. So we have, by the grace of God, been able to build our rhetoric program. And it's something that I've got to talk on, and I hope to do it more in terms of how to do that. I mean, there's
Mhm.
obviously barriers, there's challenges to build a small school. You've got to find some families who say, we're in it, whatever
Yeah.
happens. Andrew, we're just staying. Like, we're not going anywhere. It doesn't matter if the local high school has a championship volleyball team, and my kid maybe does get to play or doesn't get to play. That doesn't matter. I'm in this to stay. And so we had some of those families, as you can
Yeah.
tell, we have 4 graduates, and so we're just continuing to build a school that finishes the trivium, which I am so I just feel like it's so important that we get our kids to a graduation from a
Yeah.
maturity standpoint. I think is probably the biggest thing.
I think so. And having, visited thriving and a lot of them small classical Christian high schools, it's just beautiful to see. And there's so much formation still happening, right? If you pull them after eighth grade, like I think they're mature enough to, go to the local, and some of them probably are, right? But it's like we talked about earlier with the senior thesis and the portrait of a graduate. It's beautiful to see it completed. And I people are leaning leaning on you to guide them. And I think, just listening to SCL and at ACCS and now Turning Point Education, just the number of
Yep.
schools they want to start the next few years. And all of them will be K4, K6, K8 with the intent to then add on in high school.
Yep.
Talk about hard things to do, right? And hard things to build,
Hmm.
and to have a model for that, and you so masterfully doing that at Veritas. Um, one thing I want to pick your brain on a little bit too, and I've had the privilege to visit probably the most beautiful college I've ever seen in my life. There are some competing ones. I graduated from Hillsdale, absolutely beautiful campus.
Yep.
The surroundings of Hillsdale, it's Central Michigan. But Flagler College in St. Augustine, and really grateful for that partnership that we at CLT have with Flagler. And you mentioned Dr. Brad Rowe earlier. Just really embracing classical education, and you've been part of it since the beginning. It's a new institute for classical education. Um, Talk to us a little bit about what Flagler has been doing and kind of your role at the college.
Yeah. So, I mean, like in really any small town in America right now, you're probably going to find some iteration of classical education
Hmm.
somewhere. It might be in a basement, but it's happening, right? So the higher education world is responding as it really should, right? It,
Hmm.
it has to respond because the need for classical teachers far outweighs the who we have, right? So the response has been, I think, and on many levels, really great. Flagler responded as well, right? In
Hmm.
2023, with a grant, they were able to basically formulate the Institute for Classical Education. And really, predominantly at this point in time, Soren, this is really for teacher education.
Hmm.
So it's really every month. Really a speaker, and oftentimes a nationally known speaker is coming into St. Augustine and is doing a 3-4 hour workshop with teachers who are local enough to be able to get to it.
Hmm.
And so I think it's been a really positive thing for the college. I think it's been a really positive thing for even teachers from my school to be able to go and experience. And we're excited to see kind of where it can go. I think
Hmm.
there are more things in the pipeline from
Yeah.
a Flagler board perspective to say, okay, could we do more undergraduate level education that could match the institute and find a pipeline for classical education for essentially Florida right now, but they there are many who would love to see like a Flagler be the
Yeah.
Hillsdale of the South or something
Right.
like that, where basically there is the ability and need for education of classical teachers. I mean,
Right.
it's a constant conversation that I have with heads of school, with higher education. Just how can we really provide a pipeline for
Right.
these schools? If there's going
That's
to be as many as predicted,
yeah.
there's going to be a huge need.
Yeah, totally. You're
So
absolutely right, and I get to talk to some heads here and there, and where do we recruit teachers? And yeah, we have the UDs and the Grove Cities and the Hillsdales, but the numbers just don't meet the demand, right?
correct.
And so
Yep.
inevitably, you'll have to hire some folks that did not go through these colleges, and to be able to send them to trainings and to
Yep.
kind of immerse them in the tradition is really really valuable. And I think you mentioned the meeting the demand. I mean, it's a beautiful testimony to where the movement has been, where it is now, right? That
Yep.
there are now these institutions. Andrew and I, we're going to an event at the Hamilton Center at University of Florida in November, right? Another, right, department institute school now, of I think it's civics and classical education, right?
Yep.
Investing in and meeting the demand of classical education. So yeah, I'm grateful that you're part of Flagler. Our friend Rob Jackson is part of the institute
Yep.
as well, um and I think it's yeah, to ask a national speaker, especially between the months of maybe November and March, to come down to St. Augustine is it's a little bit. a little bit
It
easier
can
than other
it can be
places.
tough. I mean, Soren, you've been here enough that probably I'm like, "Is this Soren's second home?" Like,
I
you know.
I'm trying. Trust me. I'm working on it with Paula. Even if it's just 1% of the year, that would
Okay.
be great. Maryland is a wonderful state. And has wonderful taxes. That's all I'm going to say about that. So it would be nice to be in Florida more often. But I'm certainly grateful for all the love that CLT has been getting in Florida and
Yeah.
from you, Andrew. We do have one more question, my absolute favorite one, and one that sometimes our guests dread because there's no cheating. It has to be
Mhm.
one, Andrew. What's one book or one text that you can point to that has had the greatest impact on your life and why?
Right. Obviously, other than the word of God, which is sharper than a two-edged sword,
Yep.
right? It just that is a lifeline for me. I have to say, and I have to think about this because oftentimes we have a favorite book right now. Like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really have to go back to some writing that has really caused me to see beauty and has caused me to just pause and really have to think and work through something has to be the works of Shakespeare.
Mm,
Um, just I feel like it has had a just even just watching uh, knowing that a small child can sit and watch a Shakespeare play, spoken, right, and can understand it. Which, when you're trying to work
mm,
a ninth grader through, Romeo and Juliet, let's say, it takes some time. They've got to get into that language, but just to see the beauty of verse and prose in there, I have to say that is something that was of a huge impact on my life to recognize when you do the work, you can really see the beauty and kind of build that a deep understanding and just a huge appreciation, obviously, for it wasn't just it was written down, but it was written for the stage.
age.
So and maybe maybe people know this, but there are literally no stage directions in
Yeah.
Shakespeare, right? It's actually written into the text, so to speak, right? Which again, just pure brilliance and just something that we should aspire to be able to write something like that. That's not people are not writing like that now.
No.
So
Did you
so
have a favorite as a director, right? To put on.
that is
That's
that
even a
is
harder
so
question.
hard. I mean, probably Much Ado About Nothing is definitely
Yeah.
a favorite. I mean, there's some thematic things that kind of roll back and forth within Shakespeare. Um, but yeah, probably I would say Much Ado About Nothing.
Wonderful. Well, Andrew, this has been absolutely delightful. Again, we're here with Dr. Andrew Smalley, headmaster of Veritas Classical School in beautiful St. Augustine, Florida, and also a board member of CLT's academic board. Really grateful for all you've done. I can't wait to see you in a few weeks here in Annapolis. Keep up the good work, and say hi to your lovely wife, Robin, and God bless you, my friend.
Yeah, thanks so much, Soren. Appreciate it. It's been fun. Take care.